Hey everyone, this is the Love of Cinema podcast. We like to talk movies. If you like to talk movies too, you come to the right place.
Guide was supposed to be made with Raj Khosla,
Right.
and Dev Saab was pretty convinced that his Rose will be Vaida and nobody else. And his initial choice of director was Raj, and Vaida ji, by her own admission, didn't want to work in a film directed by Khosla again, and because it was a bitter experience those two times. And Dev was insistent on having her as the heroine, and he had to let go of Raj Khosla. And Goldie Anand was waiting in line eagerly.
Raj Khosla made some of the biggest hits. Songs from his movies would make everyone's, and I mean everyone's, top 25 Hindi film songs list. Whether it is arguably the most widely revered black and white noir CID, or one of Devanand and Vaida Rahman's most charming films, Solwa Saal, or the landmark mystery thriller Wo Kaun Thi, or Mera Gaon Mera Desh, the movie that paved the way for Sholay. Raj Khosla's cinema will always remain among the most memorable and canonized Hindi cinema. This is Himanshu, and you're listening to the Love of Cinema podcast. But before moving on, an important reminder. Love of Cinema podcast is my labor of love, and with every episode, I've attempted to create something that cinephiles will continue to find value, not just today, but over time as well. If you enjoy organic conversations centered on Indian cinema, Love of Cinema podcast was created for people just like you. So if you enjoy the pod, please do consider supporting the show. Your support will help me continue creating content with shelf life for fans of Indian cinema everywhere. You'll find the link to support the show in the show notes. You can also support the show directly from the podcast website. It's fast, it's easy, and your support is greatly appreciated. Getting back to today's episode, I was more than happy to have National Award-winning writer Amborish Roychoudhury back on the podcast to chat about one of our absolute greats, Raj Khosla. Listeners of the podcast will recall that previously, Amborish and I did an episode on Mukul Anand's Agnipath, a movie both of us are fans of. On this episode, Amborish joins us to talk about Raj Khosla and his cinema, which happens to be the subject of his fantastic new book, an authorized biography of Khosla, that Amborish has co-written with Khosla's two daughters. I like this book because I think it really lays bare a man who was as talented as he was sensitive, a man who in some ways transformed Hindi cinema. I would recommend it to anyone who wants to understand the man behind those landmark films and those immortal songs. You'll find the Amazon book link in the show notes. Raj Khosla, the man, and his cinema with Amborish Roychoudhury. Here goes. Hey Amborish, how are you doing?
I'm good, Himanshu. How are you?
I'm doing great. By the way, just before we start, Amborish, great book. This is one of those biographies that, doesn't allow you to skip any page, let alone a chapter, because there is so much information in here. And
Thank
I
you.
love the way that you have gone about it because it's not just a collection of anecdotes, but I think this is one of those biographies that really kind of lends a window to who Khosla was, who the person was, and I think that's why people read books about people, right? Because we have mostly seen the movies, we know their quotes, but it's about who that particular person was behind that face, behind that name. So great book, first of all, and let me congratulate
Thank
on
you.
a very nice book.
Glad you liked it.
So let's dive right in, Amborish. I wanted
Sure.
to start by talking about the two life-size portraits displayed on the walls of Raj Khosla's office, portraits of KL Saigal and Guru Dutt, because I guess somewhere, Raj Khosla's Mumbai story begins by the way of these two people. So it makes sense to start there, I thought. So here is a young man who comes from Punjab. He's an admirer of KL Saigal. arrives in Mumbai with aspirations of becoming a singer, but destiny has slightly different plans for him. What happened during his early days in Mumbai, and how did this young man run into Gurudat?
So, both very strong influences on him, both Sehgal Saab and Gurudat for very different reasons. Sehgal, there's a bit of an interesting anecdote there about his father. You know, listening to a Sehgal song when he was being born, which was something that came from one of his quotes in an interview, which probably was apocryphal, not entirely true because Sehgal Saab was already, uh, Sehgal Saab became a star around the time he was a teenager or he was just growing up. So he couldn't have been around. His songs couldn't have been around while he was being born in 1925. I mean, as popularly on radio. That only goes to show how big an influence Sehgal was on him, right? So he always had this fascination for singing, I guess. He got trained in Indian classical with Pandit Jagannath Bua Purohit. And Sehgal lived in the vicinity. He lived in Matunga, where the Khoslas had the famous Khosla Niwas, which eventually became a landmark. Where all the family used to congregate.
Right.
And Sehgal Saab, Prithviraj Kapoor, a lot of those people used to live in the vicinity. I mean, that was quite a hub those days, almost like Pali Hill and Bandra is now, has been for a while. But Madunga was quite the throbbing center of celebrities and singers and actors. And there was this particular building, which I'm forgetting the name of now, where Sehgal used to live, and a lot of actors and creators used to live in. And Sehgal Saab used to sing in his terrace, and there used to be a sort of gathering of talented people, kind of a mehfil where, and it was open air mostly. He used to sit with his harmonium and sing his ditties, and it used to rain there, and people around in the neighborhood also used to enjoy. So sometimes Khosla would go there and listen to his songs. And by this time, Sehgal Saab was a huge star. And he had, uh, he was through with his career in Calcutta, which was New Theatres, which actually made him a star. And he had come to Bombay. And he was living in Matunga and singing. And that is the time when Khosla became, um, enamored by his music. One cannot even fathom the kind of stardom that Sehgal Saab had at that point, right? He was a really huge star, like a film star and a singer. So after Devdas and President and all of those films that he had made, those songs were of course big hits. And Khosla had this rare opportunity of having a physical access to a space where he inhabited, and he used to be there. And at one point, they had a short interaction, and he said, "Beta, tum jab gaoge, meri awaaz mein gaoge. You will sing in my voice," which was kind of prophetic, and maybe because of the influence or whatever Khosla Saab started singing uh, stylistically, and his voice kind of resembled Sehgal Saab a lot, right? He started singing in his style, which seems whatever it seems today, but those days that affectation, that nasal twang, was the in thing. A lot of singers used to kind of imitate that and sing like that. So Raj Khosla used to sing like that. He had a great tonal quality. And so Sehgal was a huge influence, and influenced by the stardom of Sehgal Saab, he wanted to be a singer. He wanted to become a playback singer. He had a short career in radio, both hosting and singing, and then eventually a short-lived career as a playback singer. But I go on in the book and explain why that eventually transformed into acting and other pursuits and not singing so much. There is a story behind that as well, which I've explained in the book. So Sehgal has been an abiding influence throughout his life. Probably one of the things that remained in his heart, which he couldn't fulfill, was this dream of becoming a singer. When Dev Saab initially gave him the impetus to go and join Gurudutt, one of the things that he said was that uh, being a filmmaker, assisting a director would eventually be a pathway to become a filmmaker. And being a filmmaker, you would be able to sing, give yourself the opportunity to sing in your own films. And that was one of the reasons that he went ahead and started working with Gurudutt. The, dream of eventually become a singer. Not many opportunities were presented to him along the way, but there is a story that I heard from the stars that he worked with and the family members, which I've mentioned in the book, that he used to carry a peti, which is a harmonium, which was called a peti in the boot of his car, and he used to bring it out every time there was a party or something and sing a Sagal ditty, and it was quite a thing. And he very surreptitiously kind of included some of his singing in some of his films in ways that they hid in plain sight and were not revealed until, hopefully, until this book came out. Um, so that was Sehgal Saab, a huge, huge influence on him. He paid tributes to him in Do Raste, in you know, and of course he would have his picture in his office. Big, big fan. And besides that, Gurudutt, you said, right? So Gurudutt was his first guru, his sort of his mentor, his guide. Whatever he learned from Gurudutt. Sehgal was an influence, but he didn't work with Sehgal sir. Gurudutt he worked with extensively, and Gurudutt had an influence on him which is more than skin deep. I mean, it goes beneath the surface level. It's not merely just how he shot songs or how he learned filmmaking, the craft of filmmaking, etc. It went way, way
Much deeper
deeper.
than that. Yeah.
Yeah, which he has spoken about in his interviews with Nasreen Munni Kabir, which I've quoted in the book. Um, that there was a melancholy aspect to Gurudutt, which we all have been exposed to through his films, and there's a brand that has been built around Gurudutt, an aura now over the years of the artist in agony, which we have seen so many people. I mean, whether it's Van Gogh, whether it's Picasso, so many artists and singers and people like that. And Gurudutt is definitely sits squarely among them as a creator whose agony was expressed in his cinema. And that part of him, Raj Khosla, resonated with a lot. These are mysterious things. You can't break them down, but that was one aspect of him that the pain uh, somehow transferred in its own way to Raj Khosla and penetrated into his cinema in some way. It wasn't autobiographical in the sense that Gurudutt's films were. His pain wasn't front and center. Gurudutt's films are indulgent. Even a film like Kagaz Ke Phool was indulgent. Pyasa was indulgent. Indulgent in the best way possible, where his personal pain, his agony, was reflected in his films, and you can see that, you can feel it. Raj Khosla, well, he wasn't as direct about expressing his own traumas, his own demons. He did exorcise them. He did kind of address them, or those pains and those traumas did reflect in his cinema, but in subtle ways, in different ways, through the plot, through the characterization, through those things. So you would, if you know, right? If you know what he was going through, and you look at that film, and you would know that, oh, there's this thing that he has introduced in the plot, in the script. So Gurudutt had a very profound influence in him, which went beyond the filmmaking. The person had a very strong influence on him, and they had a very strong bond, which is evident in their journeys in many ways. When CID, I mean, his first film didn't work. Raj Khosla's debut, which was offered by the producer of Jal, um, T.R. Fatehchand, a film called Milap,
Milap,
didn't
yes.
do s- didn't do so well, uh, and Raj Khosla himself was questioning his decision to make films, um, because if I mean this was during the period when Devanand could do no wrong, and this film had flopped, and he was having self doubts. But right at that moment, Gurukul turned around and gave him the biggest film that he was contemplating at that point of time. He was thinking of making Pyasa, which was an indulgent film, and he realized that film might not do as well, and he wanted sort of a cushion, a film which would be a big, huge commercial success. And who does he give the responsibility of directing it? To his trusted assistant, who had kind of not been as successful in his first endeavor, right? But he had that faith that he can pull off a project of that scale with Devanand and with Ken Singh, and with all the cornucopia and all everything that went into making a huge film those days. And it had a music director like Open Air, and it had Devanand in all his glory. So he trusted him. And that came from a certain bond. And when CID was a success, like he had expected it to be, Gurudutt came to him with the keys to a swanking new car, you know. So that was the kind of bond, that was the kind of relationship they shared. And even after he gifted him that expensive car, when Raj Khosla said that I do not want to continue being the plant under this tree that is you and your cinema, I want to find new ground and break new ground and find uh, sort of grammar of my own. Gurudutt understood it and gave him the leeway to do it, and said that doors are always open for you to come back. So it's a very interesting dynamic they shared, and their lives, their personal lives, and not so much professional life, but their personal lives
Mm,
also resonated and reflected in very strange ways,
right.
which I've spoken about, whether it was their dependence on substance,
Alcohol.
alcohol,
Yeah.
all of that, and their relationships, the al- the sort of autobiographical element in their films. You know, I've written in the book how you can draw a thread from Gurudutt to through Raj Khosla into Mahesh Bhatt. These two three different aspects, which transferred in some very curious ways.
Right. That's interesting because, maybe I should ask you this at this point because I think while we are talking about it, I think in a couple of places you kind of hinted without really spelling it out so much. But the book does hint at both Main Tulsi Tere Aangan Ki and Sunny, were somewhere inspired, by his own personal life. Would that be accurate?
Yeah,
And can you elaborate more on that?
there were elements of his personal life which were uh, reflected on those in those films. There were problems in his personal lives. There were relationships that he had out of marriage, which he has been vocal about, which he has spoken about. And see, these are areas where I have gone into, in so much as they reflected on his creativity. My intention was not to explore or sensationalize any
Right.
aspect of his personal life. So, what I found interesting, what I found curious, was what he was mentally going through, kind of reflected in the creative choices that he made in his films. If you look at the character of Goldie Anand, Vijay Anand in Main Tulsi Tere Aangan Ki and Dharmendra in Sunny. In both the instances, one man is shown squeezed between two women in a manner of speaking, who kind of tries to juggle this double life, and you know they largely fail. Um, also, also they die young, which I don't know what it says, but he was kind of fatalistic about those characters, and he wanted to reflect on their pain. The very interesting thing is, if you look at the, to use the Bollywood term of a triangle of relationships, you look at these two triangles. The interesting thing is, he shows these men as victims in a way of the circumstance where they had these two women in their lives, and yet they were in some way struggling to choose between these dynamics and trying to figure out which way to go and what would be the right thing to do. And they were shown as victims, and yet he let go of this opportunity, an exploitative opportunity of making these women as the inflictors of pain and agony. He's shown, if you look at the character of Nutan, the character of Asha Parekh in Main Tulsi, and you look at the character of Wahida Rahman, it's similar to both. They are characters with a lot of nuance and complexity. Um, they had agency, they had a certain uh, there were choices that they made even within the construct of the film. Of course, there were elements that were regressive from today's context. When we look at it from a feminist perspective, of course there are problems, but still, those characters who were stand-ins for him or his alter egos, he showed them as victims, but he didn't show these women as the perpetrator of those pains or the inflictors of the pain. They had problems of their own. They were struggling with demons of their own, which I think was very refreshing and complex. So in that manner, his life, his personal life, and the problems that he was dealing with, his traumas, were reflected in at least those two films. It was also reflected in different ways in his other films, which I've spoken about in the book. The reason I didn't get into further detail was that I didn't have permission from those respective people to name names and to get into those kind of details. And this is anyhow not that kind of a book. The idea was to delve into his creative life and how sometimes the personal seeps into the professional, right? In different ways. That is, so when you are examining an artist, that is one way to look at it, right? How we all talk about auteurs in the grander scheme of things, right? So how even in the commercial setup, there was this filmmaker whose personal life, what he was feeling inside, was being expressed, but not so overtly that it supersedes the storytelling, right?
And let's go back to Devanand.
Mm.
Khosla had a long relationship with Nauketan Films in his early years. What was that bond, or what was that relationship like? Devanand, of course, starred in five of his films, I believe. Uh,
Yeah.
five of his films, and all of them were, quite popular and hits. What was the dynamic between Devanand and Raj Khosla like? Was it also a similar one to that of Gurudutt and Khosla, where he looked upon, Gurudutt as a mentor, or was it a little different?
So it was different and similar in some ways, that he did look up to Devanand. Dev Saab, so by all accounts, by the kind of evidence that I have found, was that Dev Saab and Raj Khosla went way back. Even before they started working in films, they had a connection. They had a family connection.
Right.
There was a lawyer in Devanand's family. One of their brothers. All the brothers were not into films. There was one brother who is a lawyer, and their father, the the father of Devanand and Goldie Anand and Chetan Anand, was Pishorimal Anand, who was also a lawyer. So it was a family of lawyers originally, and they had that kind of relationship with the Khoslas. I think his grandfather or someone was a client of this family, and they had a kind of a relationship like that, and that is how the families knew each other, and that is how I guess they met. They met at the coffee house in South Bombay, like the famous coffee house in Calcutta. There was a coffee house across the country in various places, and very interestingly, these coffee houses became hubs for talented people to gather. And you will find these stories, although the Calcutta story gains prominence because of Ray and Ninal Sen and all of these people hobnobbing in those places. But what I found is this is true about Madras slash Chennai today,
Right.
and Bombay, Mumbai, and various other places. So, in one of those coffee houses, Devanand and Raj Khosla met again, and they got talking, and then he was the one who set him on this path. Raj Khosla, if you look at his early phase in the book, he's kind of trying to find his path. He is trying to find his calling. Like he thought singing was his calling, but there were certain setbacks which indicated otherwise. And then there was radio. There was a bit of banking he got into and things like that. So Devanand, for the first time, um, he also dabbled in acting, right? So Devanand, for the first time, kind of set him on his path that he was supposed to be in. So that way, Devanand had prominence in his life. He led him to Gurudat. That was one. Secondly, throughout that Gurudat stint, all the films that he worked on were largely with Devanand, barring one or two, right? Baz he was not in, but largely
Right.
Chal, Bazi, all of those films. And then CID, Milap his first film, CID his second film, Solwa Sal, Bombay Ka Babu, all of those films were um, with Raj Khosla together, back to back films. I think Ek Musafir, Ek Hasina was the first film where he branched out to a different actor and worked with it. So they had discovered a rhythm of their own. They had discovered ways of, and that has happened with so many directors and director-actor duos. But in this case specifically, they had discovered their own rhythms, their own ways of working together. And there were certain possibilities. There were other films that were announced there, but never happened. There was a film called Tejori. There was
Right.
more famously, or not so famously, but potentially so, was Guide,
Yeah.
where they would have worked together, but didn't happen. So he definitely looked up to Devanand, and also briefly there was this stint where Raj Khosla, right after his work with Guru Dutt, he worked with Navketan briefly, right? He did films with Navketan, and he actually proposed a script that which became Bombay Ka Babu later on. But so that way also he was part of the family. He was part of the Anand family, and they were very close to him. And Goldie was a friend and a competitor in many ways. They started off together. They
Right.
became competing directors, and both of them come from the house of Navketan.
Yeah. And they have a very
So
parallel kind of careers, right? So to speak.
very, 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 very. The dynamic is very interesting between them. How they started their first films and how Goldie Anand is also celebrated as a maker of songs,
Yes,
as
absolutely.
how he shot songs. How Raj Khosla is also seen as the maker of thrillers and suspense films,
Exactly.
and Goldie also made his own
Similar
share of,
genres. Right.
yeah, very very successful um, suspense films.
Amrish, now, two of Khosla's most memorable films are CID and Solwa Saal. and both starred Waida Rahman, right? But they had a rift, right, that lasted
mm,
for
mm,
years
mm,
before they finally made truce and worked again in what was
mm,
supposed to be Sunny Deol's debut film. But I
mm.
think Betab
Yeah.
became his debut film. What was this rift about, and how was the truce made?
Actually, I always look at this as two headstrong people
Right,
colliding. And to be fair, when I reached out to Vaida ji while writing this book, she was candid about what happened. She gave me the actual download of what transpired and the conversation and the fight that they had. But at the same time, very gracefully gave Raji gave credit for
right,
for his thought process and all of that. And with all respect, so sometimes, so while I didn't have his perspective on the first person, he never spoke about it in either of his interviews. He never shared his perspective either to family or to his assistants about this particular incident. But what basically happened is during uh, CID, there's a whole story about how Gurudat basically, uh, came to first uh, meet Vaida in Hyderabad, and they exchanged pleasantries, and then eventually she was invited to come to Bombay for that role, and she did, and they had a long conversation. But again, like I said, even at that young age, both of them were very headstrong. Vaida ji had she knew what she wanted. She was very clear about what she wanted and what she didn't want. So even though her mother was there with her and she was very clear that she didn't want to change her name, and she was very clear that, that was a thing those days, right? I mean, we all know that it was a norm. I mean, whether it was Dilip Kumar or Manoj Kumar and all of these actors had to change their names. I mean, especially the women. I mean, if you look at Madhubala, you look at Meena Kumari, you look at, all of these uh, actresses specifically had to change their names. But she flat out refused to do so, refused to do something which was a norm those days, and that
right,
was taken as insolence by somebody who was just coming in, not even started. So Raj Khosla thought of herself as an upstart, and she was just confident. She was comfortable in her own shoes, and he kept complaining about it to Gurudas and saying that देखो इनको अभी ये आवाज उठा रही है तो बाद में क्या करेंगी, something as simple as this. And then there was a clause about the costume and the clothes and all of that, things that she's not comfortable with. If she's not comfortable, she'll put her foot down. And those things were there in the agreement. And lo and behold, eventually during the shoot of CID, there was a particular attire that she had a problem with, and they had to add a lace or whatever. So it's a very specific kind of a thing, which I've described in the book as well. The costume designer was, interestingly, Bhanu Ataiya. This was her debut was Milap, and this was her CID was her second film. So she debuted with Raj Khosla and eventually went on to win an Oscar for Gandhi. So she had designed the costume, and there was a bit of tiff on that, and Gurudat has had to step in and play the mediator. Eventually, same thing happened in Solva Sal. Again, it was some kind of an attire that she had a problem with, too low cut, and she spoke about it. She was uncomfortable, and she expressed. She was candid, and again, Raji couldn't take it that a young girl who has just been, I mean, couple of movies old is trying to call the shots. And they had a bit of exchange of not so pleasant verbiage. And then Dev Saab had to come into the picture and mediate. And he obviously took her side because this was a lady having discomfort with her, wardrobe, and so Raj had to give in. So there were these kind of things, and eventually it came to a head when um, it proved prophetic in many ways and had repercussions in the future. We don't know for good or for bad, but Guide was supposed to be made with Raj Khosla,
Right.
and Dev Saab was pretty convinced that his Rose will be Vaida and nobody else. And his initial choice of director was Raj, and Vaida ji, by her own admission, didn't want to work in a film directed by Khosla again, and because it was a bitter experience those two times. And Dev was insistent on having her as the heroine, and he had to let go of Raj Khosla. And Goldie Anand was waiting in line eagerly, and he had proved his mettle even before. So he was. One wonders, one can only wonder if Guide had gone to Raj Khosla, what
Yeah,
kind
what
of
kind of
film
film
Raj
would
could
that
have.
would have been? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. When Sunny came about many years later, they buried the hatchet very gracefully. Even Wahida ji, and she also told me throughout these intervening years, they kept meeting at parties and they kept discussing poetry and all those stuff that intellectuals talk about. And he was a great conversationalist. He had you know the word gentleman has connotations, and he was that. The Victorian ideal of a true gentleman. He was kind of that, and so they didn't hold grudges very long. And then after a point, and they both buried their hatchets. And I think her husband Shashi spoke to her that it's been too long, and you should, and it was a great role. The film didn't work, but her role was fascinating in the film. And they just went back to the sets, and there was no problem in Sunny. Sunny, incidentally, is the first film that they worked together on where they had no problems.
By this time, I think they were much more mature, and
Yeah,
they had many more years behind them.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
Amrish, let's talk about Khosla, the filmmaker. Now, I wanted to start by his admiration for Frank Capra, because and there is also this interesting note that you make in the book that Raj had a thing for hat tips. You mentioned that right from Solva Sal. So can you first of all can you talk a little bit about his admiration for Capra and the influence there, and then also talk a bit about interesting nods and Easter eggs in his films, and we'll take it from there.
So Frank Capra, and in my mind, this is not something that is spoke about, but I always thought there are interesting parallels between his filmmaking and Billy Wilder's. Not stylistically so much, but this whole thing of very deftly switching genres in an era where directors were essentially, largely, by and large, associated with certain genres. Right.
Slotted into yeah.
Yeah. So in this period, Billy Wilder is somebody who is known to jump around in genres and be gloriously successful in all of them. And ditto for Raj. I mean, he did suspense films, he did dacoit dramas, he did family dramas, he did love stories, all of that. And he was, those are all iconic films in their own ways, right? So that way, I think Billy Wilder is also a good parallel. Frank Capra, he spoke about very often with Bhatt Saab, Mahesh Bhatt, who was his assistant. He used to quote Capra and his filmmaking and speak about it. Well, one could see the influences in some of his early films more than later films. Um, the the Country Bumpkin and the Commoner and
Even
um,
Solva Sal, I would say, right?
Solvasal, yeah, of course. And the this thing about a character having true goodness in them, and then the conflicts with the world around them. So that aspect kind of resonated with him, and he tried to deal with it in his own ways. There were so while there was goodness in those characters, but it wasn't as plain Jane as that. I mean, it wasn't. It was complex, right? Um, So whether it's Devanand's character in Solvasal or Devanand's character in Milap, which was probably possibly the only film where he played a pumpkin, where he played a not really the fool, but somebody who is a simpleton. Dev Saab never played simpleton. I mean, he was all flamboyance, from the tip of the head to the nail of his toe. So yeah, this was the only instance probably he played some sort of a very simplistic person like that. And I would say that while Milaf might not have worked, I mean, he pulled it off rather well. I mean, Dev Saab's character was very interesting. So yeah, so Frank Capra, there was a lot of influence from that perspective, and also um, these two films. I don't remember, was Solvasal also a revisit of one of his films?
Yes, yes. So,
Um,
Solvasar is like a cross between, Roman Holiday and this other film.
and it happened one night.
Yeah, yeah. I
It
think,
happened one.
yeah, I mean, Mahesh Bhatt's Dil Hai Kya Manta Nahi is a straight riff on It Happened One Night.
It happened online. So there was a whole group of a bunch of films made in the 50s and later, which was the twist on It Happened Online. There was Chori Chori, Raj Kapoor's Chori Chori, and
Yes,
then there were a bunch of films in Bengali, and there was of course. So Raj Khosla's Solo Asad was not a direct inspiration from It Happened One Night, but there are elements you can see. You could see
right.
that this girl eloping with an not so good guy, and then eventually a reporter, um, you know, kind of rescuing her or whatever, right, and becoming her companion, um, in her pursuit. So there are elements which are from that film or from that template. So yeah, so those were the influences, but I don't think it went deeper than and longer than his initial films. I think he also thrived on exploring the darker side of the human psyche, if you get what I mean. So Dev Saab, uh, so one of the things that I one would imagine when one looks at it, would Dev Saab, one of the things that would make Dev Anand and Raj Khosla really resonate as storytellers was that at this point, Dev Anand was exploring gray characters, right? All of them were in many ways. Ashok Kumar, in many ways, was exploring the grayness of characters, whether it was in various films, in Sangram and the Kismat and those films, right? Uh, Dilip Kumar is a different space, but if you look at the early Raj Kapoor, those roles are also dark. But uh, somebody who made a trademark of that was Devanand, because in almost all the films she was a goon or a crook or somebody who eventually had a change of heart. But largely, the stories saw him as somebody crooked and somebody with not so noble intentions initially, but somebody who has a change of heart. So he inhabited a very dark kind of a space, psychologically and physically, right? So in all those initial films, which gave him that moniker of a suspense maker or a thriller maker, and how we look at the initial Raj Khosla as the maker of noir, came from his work with Devanand, where Dev Saab was doing those. And the first time, if you notice, Raj Khosla moved out of that space when he kind of, branched out into other actors. His first proper love story was Ek Musafir Ek Hasina. Before that, it was mostly crime and those kind of spaces. So I think that is where he kind of also deviated from what mm, what a creator like Frank Capra would look at. Although these things are not, one can't generalize. It doesn't mean that
Sure.
Frank Capra made only a certain kind of film, but I have used a quote by Capra in the book where it talks about a certain kind of character that moved it.
Right,
right?
right.
Which was the goodness, the nobility in certain people, the nobleness in certain characters. So which definitely influenced him, and which he spoke about later on when he was speaking to Mahesh. But I would be tempted to think that people like makers like Billy Wilder and makers like Hitchcock, in many ways, would have influenced him, and people call him the Hitchcock in India in many ways, which is not as simple. I mean, he did all different kinds of genres, which Hitchcock didn't probably. And also in Matunga, there's a particular Aurora Theatre, which today is known for its Rajnikant outings. Whenever there's a Rajnikant film, there's a screening, and it's well known in Bombay for that. People go there and watch that film. But those days, they had all the Hollywood classics being shown in that film when Raj Khosla was growing up there, and he would have seen Rebecca, he would have seen these early Hitchcock films, and those influences one could see the
Wo
in
Konti
some of the
and
character,
yeah,
some of the characterization also, you know. So that was interesting. So those filmmakers, and as for you're talking about hat tips, right? One talks about Easter eggs in Hollywood and in filmmaking in general, and one talks about Tarantino, and one talks about in in Bollywood specifically, one would talk about an Anurag Kashyap and filmmakers like that who nudge nudge wink wink moments in their films where they pay tributes to other filmmakers and other films. But Raj Khosla had this, even back then, he had these moments where I don't know, those were in jokes more than so. Easter eggs are where you are kind of in filmmaking. Easter eggs are where you kind of um, the joke is with the audience, not on the audience, but you are sharing a joke with the audience and telling them, see, here's this moment. You know, sometimes it's in the background, but it's for people who notice it. But Raj Koshla's jokes were so much in jokes that it seemed like it was for the cast, it was for the crew, right? In
right.
CID,
It's an inside
uh,
joke.
in
Yeah,
in CID, you have this rap sheet, right, in the police station where there's a pickpocket and things like that. There's crimes mentioned, and the criminals' names are VK Murthy and and all the crew members and stuff like that, which is very very interesting. Which you can only notice today. In those days, I would imagine the frame is just gone. I mean, you can't pause it, right? But
absolutely.
today you can pause, zoom in, and see. So you see that happening today, and today's 4K and HD even enable you to do it. So there's that, and then in Anita there was this whole uh, blackboard which I've spoken about in the book, where Manoj Kumar's character goes to meet these detectives, bumbling detectives, to give them the case of the disappearing woman, which is Sadhna. And while talking to them, there's this board behind them, which talks about how the art director of the film, and he named him, and it said that this person has run away, right, with somebody, and some other person, and who is a psychopath, those kind of things, when he would uh, you know pull the legs of somebody in the crew or whatever, some sort of an in joke. So there were these things throughout his films, and then I also mentioned his singing, where he has kind of, well, that has relegated to an in joke, or to be a sort of an Easter egg, because he never spoke about it. Nobody knew about it until you saw it, and you knew this is his voice, and he has sang on the in those films. It's very, very interesting. And yeah, so these are the bits that he included in his films, and uh, I think there's a you know fun loving side to him, which comes out in these aspects, where he's just having a joke at somebody's expense, and which is for uh, posterity, which is imprinted on screen in these films. So yeah, so that was there. That's another hallmark of his filmmaking. Yeah.
And we cannot talk about Raj Khosla and not talk about Wokonti. So,
Hmm.
and there is a very nice passage in the book where you just talk about the opening sequence, which is
Hmm.
tremendous, by the way. But let's start on the note of how Wokonti came about, because I think that's also a very interesting story in itself.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I know you mention it in the book, but if you could just
Hmm.
briefly,
Yeah. Yeah.
tell the germ of that, and then we'll move on to the opening sequence of the film.
Sure. So there are quite a few versions of the origin story. One of the versions is that Gurudat had started this project called Raz, I think, which was an adaptation of Wilkie Collins' Woman
Yes,
in White. And
it was shelved
he
later on.
started,
Yeah.
yeah. So in the manner of Gurudat, he started shooting and then decided that it's not working, and then he just shelved it. And young music composer was supposed to debut with that film. A chap called R.D. Burman was supposed to debut with that film, but that didn't happen because the film never happened. And eventually, one version of the story is that Raj Khosla he retained that script or that idea or whatever, and eventually went to Gurudat saying that I want to make this film, and he gave him the permission. That is one version of events. The other version, which I think is closer to the truth, is that Dev Chatterjee, who was the screenwriter, who had originally written the script of Vokanthi. So this idea was brought to him by NNCP, the producer, who had seen a film, and he brought this idea to him, and he wrote this script. But um so one wonders what film this could have been, and I have mentioned in the book that there are one or two possibilities of versions of Woman in White, which was released around that time. He must have seen one of those versions and came to him instead of the novel. He spoke about the films, and then so the screenplay was written, and it was supposed to go to another director, but that director wasn't available, and I suppose it. Uh, Anywho, though it was supposed to be given to another director, and eventually it came to Raj Khosla, and the rest is history. So, also the Raz, Gurudat's Raz, as well as Mokanthi, have take very interesting and very sharp deviations from the source material of the novel. So it's difficult to say whether Raz or Wokanthi were actually adaptations
Right.
of um,
There is somewhere inspired by that
of
story.
women. Yeah, inspired by the germ of the story, but the way the stories flowered, the different directions that
That's
they
different.
took were very different. Yeah,
And Amrish, the opening sequence of Wokonti, and you talk about this in your book. Uh, what is it about that sequence that you find profound, that you find remarkable? And what was it about this sequence that was, in a way, quite pioneering for the times?
I don't know whether it was pioneering, but I thought he so till that time he had made a certain kind of suspense films, a certain kind of thrillers, crime thrillers, and all of that. This was the first time he was making something which was almost bordering on horror. Till now, when we look at the poster and the way that it was promoted and the way that it is presented, it's almost like a horror film. There are elements in the film. if you don't, um, if the conclusion is not revealed to you when you're watching the film, you watch it, you know, with those eyes. There is an element of horror there. There are apparitions and things like that. So that mood, for him to build that mood, he had a few minutes when the film builds up, and he does it gloriously. That feeling of creeping fear or dread, and it's just beneath the skin. I mean,
Yeah,
it's not, you're not jumping on your seat. Well, there's a moment like that, but largely it is just creepy. The way, the scene unfolds, that this woman, and this whole thing about woman in white, a woman wearing a white sari, which became a template for horror films in India for decades after. And this was one of the earliest films with that kind of a template, where in the dead of the night, there's this woman wearing a spotless white sari in the middle of the road, and he picks her up, and they have this very strange conversation, and where what she says is kind of ominous. The responses that she gives, and there's the sound of the wiper, you know, how he
yeah,
builds that
yeah. And
in.
when it stops and starts again, yeah,
Yeah. So how he builds that in, and uses sound and visuals to build that. And then there the just before the credits roll, just before the title hits you, there's this moment where he drops her in front of the graveyard, and then you can't find her, and then suddenly you have this title Vokonti, which totally explains, kind of, I mean, which kind of describes what just happened. You don't have uh, such apt descriptions of the title in films, right? So Vokonti, I mean, you can't find her, and then there's the title. So I think he built that genre really well, and you want to see this film even if you've seen this film before. So there's a certain kind of a story, right? Um, the way Hitchcock built his films, right? Um, it- Something happens in the first 5 minutes that really grips you. So there's a bit of an art there, that few filmmakers have been able to do convincingly, where they draw you in such that you want to see the story now. You're dying to see what happens next. Although it's not that you have given a rundown of the characterization in vivid detail, right? You don't know anything about Manoj Kumar's character. You don't know next to nothing about this random apparition, this ghost, this woman, right? But you want to know what happened because of the graveyard and the build up and all of that. So I think it was glorious the way he did it.
it's one of the great title card drops. No, no doubt about it.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
absolutely glorious. And then, arguably one of the most popular Hindi film songs of all time, Lag Ja Gale. Again, a place where, he reminds us that the school that he comes from, because the Guru Dutt influence is all over the visualization of this song. I think you mentioned in the book as well the high contrast lighting. For me, especially, wherein lies the parallel with Guru Dutt are the close and the mid shots of Sadhna, because that's very Gurudat like. It's because Gurudat did that at a time when there used to be the existing trend was more like long shots or mid shots, and he did some mid shots, but there were a lot of close shots that Gurudat started using in his song visualization. And so when we think today about all those iconic songs, those are the frames that come to our mind. And I think something similar happens in Lag Ja Gale as well. So I thought, that's where again Guru Dutt makes an appearance in his style.
Yeah, yeah, very much so. And a lot of people, and I have also spoken about, before I get into that, I just wanted to correct something. I think I said Dev Chatterjee, it would be Dhruv Chatterjee, the writer of Vokanthi.
Okay.
That is Dhruv Chatterjee. I'd like to rectify that. I'm so sorry. But coming to Vokanthi, they spent a good while trying to figure, which direction Sadhana would look at, right? How would she look? And so they spent a lot of time figuring out how to build that aura around her, the mystique, right? So all of that. So we see, we all talk about the framing in Gurudat's songs and the framing in Raj Khosla's songs, and but we also need to understand that it wasn't just which one of the things that Raj Khosla has spoken about later is that he didn't want his craft to call attention to itself. It was at the service of the film, right? So that kind of framing, that very specific kind of framing was also a means to an end, which was basically building a certain sort of quality in those characters, a certain sort of mystique, and to draw you in, of course, in their world. Raj Khosla, yes, got it from Gurudat, but he also had his own style of doing it. When you look at Sadhana in Work on Thee, every frame, every time, she's shown as an extremely beautiful woman, but at the same time, there is this aura around her. There is this mystery. And this mystery is not just a side angle shot and some shadow falling on her face on all of those things, just or sound effect or something. She was a goddess. She was a veritable goddess. But there's this dilemma, there's this doubt somewhere as to what her motivations are, why is she sad, what does she want to convey but unable to convey. All of those things he had to say through her face, right? And hence a certain kind of framing. I have mentioned in the book how there was a Tamil film which was a remake of Vokanthi. It's called Yarni, I think, which starred Jayalalitha, where uh, they replicated the song and they tried to, and the makers tried to replicate the setting and everything. And when you look at it, you see the difference. When you look at the song, you see the difference of what Khosla was able to achieve and what you know uh, they they were unable to replicate. So yeah, so Gurudat definitely comes from the Gurudat school, but he made it his own.
Right.
He knew how to use those tools, and so stylistically, style and those skill sets he learned from, he absorbed them, and then he basically learned how to
Chiseled
use
it
it in
into
his
his
own way.
own style.
Yeah, yeah.
Amrish, I wanted to request you to read a particular quote from the book, since I think that kind of gets at the very substance of how Raj Khosla looked at his films and his craft. So I think the quote that I'm referring to, obviously, you'll know that quote. I believe it's on page 230.
Hmm. Hmm.
So if you could just read that for us, and then we'll talk about it.
Yeah. So, just for context, this is about Mehta Sitere Anand Ki. This is during Mehta Sitere Anand Ki, where he was working with another consummate filmmaker. So, Bodhi Anand and Raj Khosla working together, and both of them secure in their own way. And but so in this context, I quote a particular interview of Raj Khosla where it talks about how he didn't allow the craft to consume him so much that he calls attention to itself, like I explained just a while ago. So he says, and I quote, I don't want to make the best film ever made, the film that will be a landmark. I don't have the meticulous sense of design and purpose which many others have. Maybe this lack of ambition of mine makes my actors realize I'm not making the film for myself. They tell themselves he's not going to take away everything, all the credit. He's going to share it with us. I project my actors to their very best. To design a film so that I, the director, stands out is easy, very easy. There are techniques to it. And there is another way. Narrate your story and the actors are there to be seen on the screen. That's what movies are about,
That's a
you
beautiful
know.
quote because, first of all, not only is here a man, who has made these memorable films, trying to really, take himself away from that very projection of the art that you see on screen. And he's doing it in the greater service of cinema or of storytelling. So what does it tell us about Raj Khosla vis-a-vis his legacy, and what does it tell us about him as a filmmaker, or how he
I
approached the art of storytelling?
I have this grouse that or call it a complaint or whatever, that um, film analysts and those who have taught film over the years never really sort of used the same tools that they have used to analyze so-called serious cinema, and you know whether it's film noir or um, neorealist films, or the films of Fellini, Kurosawa, Truffaut, all of that. They haven't used the same tools and the same devices and the same level of intellectual depth to analyze Hindi commercial cinema. I would argue that it
Absolutely.
it is it is a space unto itself. It is a tradition unto itself. And just like you have to walk a few steps towards a Fellini-esque kind of a film to even fathom what it's about, similarly, in this song and dance,
Yeah.
for lack of a better term, that is used, one has to walk a few steps towards it to understand the tradition, imbibe it, and then enjoy those films, right? So, Raj Khosla, so we talk about the auteur theory. We talk about how certain film cinema is a director's medium, right? This grand statement that is often made, that films are made by directors. The actors are puppets in their hands. And that, in some way, is grandiose and maybe a little uh, condescending from the perspective of the director, that the director is this almighty, all powerful being which is making a film, and its only purpose is to serve their vision, right? Raj Khosla presents an antithesis to that and says that if I were to show off my skill and show off my frame and look, this is what I've shot, right? Look at my editing. I am trying to tell you something. Be careful, pay attention. Almost like a teacher rapping the knuckles of a student that, hey, don't drift. Look at me. Pay attention, right? So that kind of a thing, right? With so-called serious filmmakers and all of that. And I say that with every ounce of respect, that the greatest cinema of the world tends to do that. It tends to rap the knuckle of the audience and say that, pay attention, look at me, look at this frame. It means something. Now think about something in your own lives and blah blah blah. But here he says that to do that, for me, I'm a student of cinema. There are these tools, there are these tricks that one can employ to tell you, here, I know what editing is about. Look at look at how this montage has been shot. Look at this frame. It's so beautiful, it's so grandiose, right? But what's more nuanced for me, it takes a lot of restraint for me to not do that and get uh, claps from the audience, and instead let my hero or my actor to take that place and get all the admiration from the audience. So these are insecure people in the context of Indian popular cinema. The actors are really, really insecure people. So to get them to deliver what you want them to deliver, you have to give them that pedestal. You have to sacrifice that pedestal and tell them, stand on this, and I will mount you and make you into this god which people will marvel at. And which is why those actors felt secure with him and said that this guy is not going to steal the show and take all the glory for himself and all the claps for himself. He's reserving it for us. And that is why the relations that he had with everybody that he worked with, whether it was Rajesh Khanna, Shatrughan Sinha, Wahida Rahman, Mumtaz, Sadhna, all of these collaborations, all of these people, even Wahida ji, who he had a problem with, all of these people kept coming back in ways and means to him and working in his films in many ways. Rajesh Khanna came back, Mumtaz came back, yeah, Sadhna did so many films with him, Dev Saab did so many films with him, Dharamji did multiple films with him as producer and as director. So Manoj Kumar worked in so many films with him. This was why was this? This was because he gave the actor their space and said that this is that kind of film where actors need that kind of pedestal and that platform, and I'll give you that platform. So, which I find a very, very interesting and very, very uh, nuanced argument, which I've not heard before. I mean, that was
I agree.
very interesting.
Yes, yes. And to your point that, we need to be more intellectually curious about all kinds of cinema. We tend to slot, smart cinema, masala and all the, in different slots, but there is a need to approach all of them from a similar kind of a lens. I wanted to talk about one person in particular, Amrish, who was a key collaborator with Khosla, who is G.R. Kamath, the writer. And I believe, as you have mentioned, he was the person who played hand in introducing him to Marathi theater literature. And three of Khosla's films are somewhere based on Marathi novels. I think Do Raste, Main Tulsi Tere Angan Ki, and what was the third one? Mera
Mera
Saya.
Saya partly, yeah.
Yes. What do we know about this person? And he was a prolific writer, but what was this relationship like?
Well, G.R. Kamath was a prolific writer even when he met uh, Raj Khosla. Even when they started work together, even before that, he had been writing. He had written a bunch of films for Raja Paranjpe. Raja Paranjpe is one of the giants of Marathi cinema,
Absolutely.
very respected name in Marathi commercial cinema. Again, just as prolific or even more as Raj Khosla, and made a huge range of films in various subjects and various genres. So uh, they kind of started work around the same time, or maybe a little earlier and a little later. G.R. Kamath wrote a number of films for Mr. Paranjpe, and he had already written a few films when they started collaborating together, Raj Khosla and him. Um, well, being so Marathi culture has had a strong um, influence and a strong kind of uh, connect with literature, the arts, and mostly, more potently, theater and literature, right? Long tradition, and goes back years and years. So G.R. Kamath came from that tradition, and hence, the strong bond with literature, and them being very good friends, he introduced him to the works of Marathi literature, and one finds it interesting. I keep thinking about this, though the exact details aren't available, as to did he hand over the Marathi versions to Raj Khosla? Was Raj Khosla able to read Marathi? I don't know. Did he read them to him, translate them for him? Because for all of these novels to have been translated into Hindi and being available in Hindi or English, I don't know whether they were, could have been, but I find that interesting. Uh, Also, I think Raj Khosla had this connection with his place of work, Karma Bhumi, so to speak, that he was here and he had lived here so many years and he had a certain different artistic sensibility. So, while one can't picture him speaking in the language fluently, but I'm sure, like many of us who have lived in this state for many, many years, this region, have connected with its music, have connected with the literary figures. If we have not, one would have heard of Pula Deshpande if not read their work and stuff like that, right? So he would have connected with that in that respect, given that he kept coming back to Marathi literature in various ways. There is, of course, Do Raste, which was from Nilambari. Interestingly, Nilambari is a role played by Bindu in the film, who is kind of a gray character, and the novel is named after her. And written by Chandrakant Kakodkar. Chandrakant Kakodkar again comes back in um, Main Tulsi, where the novel that they adapted was Ashi Tuji Preet. And then before that, much before that, Mera Saya, which was a remake of Raja Paran's Patlag, and which was based in turn based on a novel, right? So that way he kept coming. I find that relationship very interesting, how he kept coming back to
Yes.
Marathi literature and Marathi sources, which one doesn't see in a that big a way with other filmmakers. So that I find interesting. Also, Kakodkar is a very interesting writer. There are instances where I've written about where he has fought against there were court cases on his novels. There were accusations of vulgarity and all of that on various of his novels, and he fought and came out triumphant. He pleaded his own case. Very very interesting character, and which also could have drawn Raj Khosla to him and his work. Nilambari, he was fascinated with Bengali culture. Chandrakant Kakodkar, his hero, the hero's brother,
It's said
which is
there.
played
Yeah.
by Balraj Sahni, is a character called Nabednu Ghosh. And they are the Ghosh family who curiously speak in Marathi because it's a Marathi novel, right? So it's a very, very curious construct that he has built. And Raj Khosla, of course, went ahead and made them North Indian in in Doraste in his own way. So those cultural exchange was very interesting
Yes.
in there. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I think we saw a lot of linkage or sourcing of Marathi literature among parallel cinema, filmmakers like Govind
Hmm.
Nilani and
Hmm.
Shyam Benegal. But you are
Absolutely.
absolutely
Absolutely.
right that in commercial, I don't think there are too many examples. Whereas Raj Khosla, at least did it thrice. So that's a very interesting point. Now, Amrish, let's talk about Mera Gaon Mera Desh, which is a great movie. And, for some of the younger listeners, so Mera Gaon Mera Desh, if you look at the basic premise of the film, it's a classic Western trope, where there is a village that's in need of a certain protector, so to speak, and that protector happens to be a criminal or a reformative criminal. So this is a trope that we see quite often in westerns. And when we are talking about this particular trope, obviously the film that comes to mind first is Sholay, and Mera Gaon Mera Desh precedes Sholay. So, and a lot of people think that, and which makes perfect sense, that Sholay borrowed heavily from Mera Gaon Mera Desh. So, my first question to you is: during your research, did you find any information where you found anything that would tell you more about Raj Khosla's take on Sholay, and if he thought that Sholay borrowed heavily from his film, and what his opinion was on that. And then we'll talk about an interesting anecdote around Mera Gaon Mera Desh.
No, none whatsoever. I
Okay.
don't I haven't found any instances of him speaking about those connections. I spoke to Mr. Mahesh Bhatt about it. He had his own take. There were others who had their takes. There are his other assistants who had takes. I spoke to Dharamji about it. He had his own take, but I have not come across Raj Khosla or anybody attributing any course to him where he would have and of course, he would have thought something. I mean, with the huge, massive success of
Success.
Sholay,
Yeah.
Yeah, he would have seen those things in that film, and one would reckon he would have even maybe spoken to Ramesh Sippy or not. I don't know. Raj Khosla also had this very strange and singular disaffect, um, you know, a kind of distance with his work. I mean, of course, was passionate about his work and everything, but he also um, very often one doesn't the few interviews that are there, he rarely talks about his past work unless poked and prodded, and he doesn't uh, want to dwell on past glories, and he isn't connected with his work. He wasn't connected with his work in those ways, right? So there is also a possibility, however faint, we would have to consider this possibility that he probably didn't even take notice and moved on to his next project, you know,
Right.
because Meragao had been done, it had done its job, and now somebody might have borrowed an element or two. Big deal. I mean, I don't know. I mean, the personality that one sees was more enigmatic than that, you know, than just being reactionary and saying that, oh, इसने मेरे से copy कर लिया and
And then while Mera Gaon Mera Desh was being shot, we know that Khosla loved his drink, and so did Dharmendra. But he was trying to keep Dharmendra off alcohol or something. There's a very interesting anecdote in the book where you said that every night, I mean, they used to sit together. Khosla used to pour himself one drink, and when Dharmendra tried to join in or, tried to pour himself, one used to say, hey, isme kya rakha hai? So what was that all about? I mean, was he really trying to keep him off alcohol or what was going on there?
both of them have two versions to this story. Huh? There are various instances like this in the book, and I become, you know, the, I take present both sides, and here also, um, Rajji said in an interview that I wanted Dharam on point and steady at all times and all of that, and he he needed him to look a certain way. He needed him to look fit, the kind of a person who could. Uh, Now, you know, in retrospect, looking at Dharanjay, one would know that he wouldn't have lost any sleep looking fit, but he did at that point. If you look at some of it, just a few films that he was doing around that time and how he looked, he was actually a little more shredded and flatter abs and all of that. Of course, not in the way that he look at bodybuilding today and all of that, but for for that period where everything happened organically. Dharamji has spoken to me about how he used to run through the streets of Chirwa, the village where they shot the film, and everybody used to, इसे क्या हो गया है कि, the for a very long span of time he used to run through the streets of the village and then play badminton and all of that, and he had cut his hair short to look that strapping man with a lot of very strong presence, and he needed to look shredded, and for that, Raji wanted to keep him off alcohol. That was his version. That was Raji's version. And Dharam Dharamji told me in the interview what he remembered was that he was deliberately staying off alcohol to be in shape for the role, and it was Raji who kept on pouring a drink and insisting that he join in, right? So, so that's that. So, so these two versions,
The
two
truth is
different
somewhere
versions
between the
exist.
two. Yeah.
Yeah, somewhere between the two, and both of them enjoyed a drink or two, and full-blooded Punjabis like that, and yeah, also very emotional. Both of them very emotional people. That comes through in the interview that Dharamji gave me, which I've quoted in the book, and what Raji says in his own interviews about the film and about working with Dharmendra.
Yeah, there is a very touching line in the book where, you say that in the autumn of his life, Khosla would often be seen weeping in front of Gurudutt's giant picture in his office. And it's a very disturbing kind of figure if you try to imagine. And like you said, there is so much common between the two. And maybe as he grew older, he maybe understood Guru that much more, and maybe he understood the pain and whatnot that.
And one would imagine him being a Punjabi, being a part of that, um, you know, not stereotyping, but not to stereotype, but if one looks at the mainstream culture those days, especially, it was all about the Gabru Jawan, somebody who is, full of um, hardness and metal and muscle and, all of those things. And the all the soft things are reserved for the women. And today we talk about men do cry, but we are talking about a generation where even generally it was scoffed at for men to shed any tears. And you see, you look at this man and hear of this man constantly breaking into, uh, at the slightest uh, opportunity presented, or something of that uh, nature happening, which would hit his sentiment or whatever, he would start weeping. And extremely emotional, almost maudlin in certain respects. And that I find very, very curious that, um, when in a period when this was made fun of, a man weeping, but he owned that aspect of him in a way. I won't call it inspiring, but that aspect I find very positive. That he let it all out. He didn't keep it pent up in ways. I mean, there was pain, and he faced it in a way.
There are some lovely pictures in the book, and two pictures that I found particularly striking are one's a promotional poster for Do Raste,
Hmm.
sorry. And it shows a director's chair with Raj Khosla's name on the chair.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
certainly he must have been a big brand. How
Hmm.
common was this? I mean, I'm thinking like there were some big directors during that day, but I don't recall seeing any similar picture of any other film.
Yeah, so there are many aspects to. So one thing you would also not notice is that is directors having a very identifiable signature every time.
Right.
Probably happened with a few of them, but the one that one can think of very prominently is Raj Khosla, where in his posters, in his film, there would be this very calligraphic way of presenting his name every time, directed by Raj Khosla. Uh, you saw that happening more prominently with the parallel cinema movement and otherwise when it was a film by Satyajit Ray or, you know, things like that. A Satyajit Ray film or things like that, or a Sham Benegal film or uh, things like that. But um, Raj Khosla, I think, in those days, he created a sort of tried to create he became a brand, and probably he wanted to, kind of um, seal it with the signature in his films, where you start identifying. So all the people that are spoken to, even after writing this book, who read this book, has spoken about the thing on the cover, the curved logo of him being put on the cover is a thing that a lot of um, people liked and actually identified with, because it was there in his posters and it was there in his films, in his cinema, which people remembered. So I think it was an exercise in branding that he attempted, and he was a brand unto himself. And see, all of these distributors and producers also knew their job at that point. And for a film like Doraste, uh, see, when Doraste was happening, the point at which it had released, uh, or about to release, Raj Khosla was the bigger star.
What was the immediately preceding film that he had made?
So Raste was 1969, so he would have made Mera Saya, and there was one film that didn't
Mera Saya
work.
was a huge hit,
It
right?
was Mera Saya was a massive hit, and Mera Saya, and then there was Chirag. So Chirag didn't do well, but Chirag was 1969, the same year that Do Raste came out. So one would say that he was coming off of a huge success
Right,
in Mera Saya.
right.
Of course, it was not as big as Wo Kanti, but out of the trilogy, it was the second big hit. Out of the Sadhana trilogy, I mean. So Anita flopped, but this one did really well. Anita didn't do well, by the way. Anita didn't do well. But then all of those hits back to back, he had made a name for himself, and he was the bigger star. Dorase was a big test for him because so many stars put together. It was an ensemble in the truest sense.
Hmm.
So many actors together. And Rajesh Khanna became a star almost simultaneously. Aradhana and the thing
Right.
happened.
That's a
There's
key
a
year
whole,
in his career. Yes.
yeah. So Aradhana and Dorate were released around the same time, within weeks of each other. And, both became hits and um, he became an overnight sensation. But while the film was being made, while he had been signed, Raj Khosla was the bigger star, and both of them signed the film because Raj Khosla was signing them. Same goes for Mumtaz. Mumtaz became a huge star after Doraste, but before that, she had done a few films here and there, but she wasn't the sensational star that we know her as. And that primarily happened after.
And then there is this another favorite picture of mine that from the book that has Opi Nayyar and Khosla at Marine Drive. While they're shooting Ye Hai Mumbai Meri Jaan, and how common was it for a music director to be on the sets? And especially outdoor locations. So I thought that was pretty interesting because I'm sure that he was there because he had some inputs as to how the
Mhm.
picture was to be shot.
You would have. I mean, they again, Raj Khosla Opinair again is a very interesting story. There were differences which cropped up in the future also while um, um, making of Joy Mukherjee and Sadhna's
Ek Musafir Ek
film,
Hasina.
Ek Musafir Ek Hasina. So there were differences that cropped up during the making of Ek Musafir Ek Hasina, and Opinair actually had a problem with Raj Khosla interfering in the music and all of that. But evidently, with this picture of CID, Opinair definitely uh, stepped into Raj Khosla's territory or must have given his inputs, or he just happened to be there on the set. Who knows? But this song is has I mean of course one of the iconic songs in Raj Khosla's Oor. But again, even in CID, so we were talking about Marathi culture and all of that. There's this character in the film who is Tony Walker's girlfriend, and this whole song is a banter between the two, where the guy talks about how tough, how difficult it is to live in the city, and this Maharashtrian girl that he's in love with tells him that don't make excuses. That I mean, this city is brilliant; it embraces you, and how, right? So again, there were these small dialogues which are in Marathi, not
Yes.
whole stretches,
Right.
but there are these snatches
Banter,
of
like you
lines and
said.
all of
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Yeah, so there was this bit where he also introduced a Marathi character in the film and made her sing that song. And many years later, Mumbai Meri Jaan, when there was this bit I mentioned in the book when everybody stood up in memoriam of the blast and how many people died, and they played this song, and everybody resonated. If you remember that film and the ending of that film, Mumbai Benichan, Nishikant Kamath was it? It was Nishikant Kamath.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
beautiful film. So again, various songs of his have had second lives and have come back all over again and all of that. This was just one of the instances.
And Amrish, he only worked with Bachchan once, right? Dostana, that's it.
Well, there was a film called Badhe Haath where
Yes, yes, yes.
Badhe Haath or Raste Ka Patthar. I think it was Raste Ka Patthar, where
Oh, that's a Raj
Khosla
Khosla
into
film?
no,
Oh,
that
okay.
was his family,
Oh, okay. Got
uh,
it. That's what I was
the
wondering. Yeah.
the nephews who Bolu Khosla and Danny Khosla would have been Bolu Khosla primarily would have been part of the production unit, and Raj Khosla was, um, if one believes the account of the assistants, it was Raj Khosla who brought in this new struggling actor called Bachchan into the project, which was one of the films before Zanjeer. And there's a whole
Yeah.
host of around 10, 12 films. So this was one of the
You
films that
mentioned
he
in the
was,
book that he threw a party when
yes,
Bachchan won the Filmfare Award in
yeah,
1971,
yeah, yeah.
again before Janjeer.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So one could surmise that there would have been some kind of a relationship in whatever way, shape, or form. But when Dostana happened, it wasn't the first time that they were crossing paths. Definitely, that is for sure. But it was the first film that he was directing him in, of course.
And lastly, Mahesh Bhatt has penned a foreword for this book. Obviously, Mahesh Bhatt
Extremely
assisted.
poignant.
Yes. And, Mahesh Bhatt assisted Khosla in his early days. There is, again, a very touching anecdote from the success party of Nam at Sea Rock Hotel, which I could just picture in front of my eyes as to what's going on there based on your description there. But any other interesting stories that Bhatt Saab shared with you that are not in the book about Khosla?
I think everything is there in the book largely, but he was, again, like Guru on Khosla. Similarly, Khosla on Mahesh Bhatt had a sort of impact, a very strong impact. Now, the impacts were different. These were different people. The resonances were different. Uh, whereas Khosla resonated with the demons and the darkness in Gurudat's soul, um, I think Bhatt Saab kind of learned from his mentor's mistakes, not to repeat them. That, or at least that was his intention. So there were various ways that these creators connected with each other, and throughout the process of this book, mind what anything that you threw at him, any question that you asked, he was ever prepared to answer, to address, and his one line was anything for my boss, right? That he kept saying, and the word that he uses was boss, a standard word for Raj Khosla. One of the things that he said was that, of course, there was this Sea Rock incident. He also mentioned that one fine uh, morning or afternoon at my book studios, he walked in on Raj Khosla making a drink, and suddenly he was making a drink over the table, and Bhatt walked in on him, and suddenly, as if by impulse, he hit the bottle, right? A knee-jerk reaction or whatever, and that made him feel. That made Bhatt feel, uh, you know, that this person is going through a lot, right? It really hurt him that this his boss, this filmmaker that they looked up to, this person that they have always looked up to, is hiding the bottle when he used to flaunt the fact that he loves drinking. And maybe it was he had started going into that phase where his confidence was crumbling and his films are not as successful and all of that. So that was one incident. I don't recollect whether I've included in the book, but it stayed with me, that moment. And he told, and he pointed out to him. He said, "I mean, why are you hiding?" And then he whatever. So that conversation went somewhere else. But I'm saying That was another poignant, very touching moment when he looks at his disciple, knows who he is, and hides from him the one thing that everybody knows about. You know, that was probably so. That is what I find interesting about his journey, about Raj Khosla's journey, that he saw the dizzying heights of stardom and success, and he saw this phase of agony and failure and dismissal and rejection also at the fag end of his life. Um, yeah,
For how many years after Dostana was he still actively making films? Not too many years, right?
almost to the end of his days. I mean, from Dostana happened in 1980 or 81, I believe. I think it
Early
is
80s, yes. Yeah.
1980. And his last film, Naqab,
Nakal.
was
Yeah.
89.
Oh, okay. So
89.
almost for a decade. Yeah.
So almost for a decade he was active. And yeah, so he kept making films all those years. But Dostana was his last massive success.
Big hit. Yeah.
Sunny did recover the investment, and it did run well. But Dostana was the last big success that he saw. He never repeated that kind of success again.
It's interesting that thing that you mentioned earlier in this podcast about this thread that travels from Guru Dutt to Raj Khosla to Mahesh Bhatt. And I love the way people talk about their prior generation or their mentors, because right now you said that Mahesh Bhatt called Raj Khosla boss, and he said anything for boss. And I particularly remember Vikram Bhatt saying the same thing in one of the interviews where he was referring to Mahesh Bhatt, and he said anything for boss. And he does call Mahesh Bhatt boss. So
Oh wow.
it's very interesting how these things kind of carry on, through
Mm, mm,
generations and
mm,
into so.
mm. And if you look at their songs, the music, I'm not saying, I mean, one doesn't, if you look at, I'm not saying Bhatt Sahab belongs to a particular uh, s- domain that Guru Dutt did in terms of shooting songs. But you look at songs in his films, they have a certain place in the storytelling. The songs themselves have a certain story to tell. The same thing goes for Raj Khosla. That's an art that Raj Khosla inherited from Guru Dutt, and I believe passed it on in his own way. And then uh, Bhatt Sahab interpreted it in his own way. You pick out any of iconic Raj Khosla songs, they had their own kind of storytelling within the songs. It was not just a distraction. Same goes for Mahesh Bhatt, whether it's Ashiki or Daddy or Hamera Hi Pyar Ki or any film that you want to talk about. The songs had a certain thing going which pushes the narrative forward.
Great. On that note, Amrish, I think it's a good note to end this our little chat on Raj Khosla and this beautiful book that you have written. It's called Raj Khosla, the Authorized Biography, and it's by Amrish in association with two of Khosla's daughters. Thank you so much, Amrish.
Thank you so much for calling me here. I enjoyed our conversation.
If you liked the episode, do spread the word on social media. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to your pods. Also, please do drop us a review when you get a chance. You can follow me on Twitter and Insta at loveofcinemasf8. You can reach me by email with your suggestions and comments, and you will find the email ID in the show notes. That's the episode. This is Himanshu, signing off, and like always, thank you for listening to the Love of Cinema podcast.
Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.